Binding not only protects your quilt from excess wear, but is also another design element, adding a final frame to your quilt. Or you can create binding from the same fabric as your final border, creating a seamless ending. A good binding that's full and straight can make all the difference in quilt competition. Follow along as I take you through the steps to attach your continuous binding by hand. A few of the tools that you'll need to do your binding include binding clips. And if you see here, I have a binding clip attached to the edge. I find the binding clips to be a lot more convenient than using pins. As you see, they snap on and off very conveniently. You'll also need a straw needle, which is a needle for applique. You'll need a quilting between or a sewing needle. And you'll need your thread. I'm using the Aurifil for your sewing because you want it to match your binding. Let me demonstrate up here. And you want it to match the back for the applique. The first step to attaching the binding is to create a 45-degree angle on one of the ends. So I'm going to lay out my ruler. This is the see-through gridded OmniGrid ruler. You see the 45 degrees right here. It follows the line that cuts through the 45, indicates it makes a 45-degree angle, which is right this way. So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm just going to, on the wrong side of this, draw a line. And I'm going to cut it. And now we're ready for the next step. Now that you made that 45-degree diagonal cut, we're going to fold this back up. And we're going to start laying it around. The next step is to have the binding laid around the quilt so none of those seams that we sewed laid any of the corners. You see there's a seam here? We just want to make sure that when we lay the binding around to be sewn, there isn't a seam in the corner. So I'm going to move it forward. You can look all the way around the binding and see that none of the seams lie in the corners. And if they do, just adjust it, move it over a little bit, and just move it around so the binding fits nicely around. You don't have to be so accurate right now, so none of the seams are in the corner. Now that you laid your quilt binding all the way around, we're going to begin to attach it with the binding clips. The way you attach it is the raw edge of the quilt faces towards the outside. The raw edge of your binding faces in the same direction. So this is the open edge, this is the open edge. And that 1/4 inch line that we drew, your sewing line, is towards that edge as well. So it's raw edge, pencil line. And now with the binding clips, I'm just going to simply make sure they line up and clip them right on. We're only going to sew one side at a time, so the rest of the binding can be moved out of the way. So with the binding strip attached to the top of your quilt, with the 1/4 inch sewing line facing you, we're not going to begin sewing at the edge of this. We're going to begin sewing about 7 or 8, or if you have a larger quilt, the more space you leave yourself, the easier it will be to attach the two ends when you get there. So I'm going to begin right about here. I'm going to go through all layers. You can only do a few stitches at a time since it is so thick. And we're sewing the binding to the top of the quilt. And you're only going to sew this, see how quickly and easily you can remove those binding clips. You're going to sew this until you get to 1/4 inch to the end of just one side. And now this is a critical moment. You're going to learn how to do the flip. So we're going to create that mitered corner by flipping the fabric away from you first, So what you form here is a raw edge with a new raw edge. And then you're going to flip the binding towards you down the new long side that you're going to sew. And now down this new long side, I'm going to just take the binding clips, clip this in place, and the new raw edge with the sewing line, as you see, is waiting and ready to be sewn. Just a few clips down this long side, and again, what we do here is you start sewing from 1/4 inch where you just left off. And by doing that, we'll create the mitered corner and ensure that your binding is filled. A good binding is going to be filled with the batting. So we're going to start sewing from here. And we're just going to continue down this long side, and again, stop 1/4 inch from the end. So now that you see all the sides are sewn, all the corners were made, we're now ready to join the two ends together on the top of the quilt. The first end that has a 45 diagonal line can be moved away, and the strip that you're just sewing on will now be evened up like it was. Take out your binding clips and open it up. And you see how it's going to overlap here. I'm going to cut some of this away. We don't need this, just to get it out of our way. So now with this strip lined up on the raw edge, and when you have a bigger quilt, this is a lot easier to do. When you're working with a small quilt, things move a little bit. And I'm going to take that first side that we put the 45-degree line, I'm just going to lay it right over. You see how I did that? With my ruler, I'm going to line it up. Is that clear? Right here on that diagonal line. And on this piece of fabric that we were just sewing, this strip, I'm going to draw the 45-degree line. Let's make sure it's there. Move this one out of the way. And now I'm going to draw a 1/4 inch line. And this is the method to join these two strips, and another 1/4 inch line, which will be my cutting line. And with my scissors, I'm going to cut on this line. And I'm going to just turn this. Now you see I have these two 45-degree lines. I'm just actually now going to line up these two ends and join them together. Alright, with these two pieces joined together with pins, I'm going to now begin sewing them together on that line that we made. Alright, so I finished sewing this line, and all I have to do is knot it, which I have, and cut away. Just drop my needle into my needle nest, and as you see here, we now have a seamless, although there was a seam there, we now have a seamless binding. Now that the binding is sewn all the way to the front, it's time to flip it over to the back. And on the back, as it gets appliqued down, you begin by taking the binding and folding it over the edge, the raw edge of the quilt. Taking your binding clips and start to clip it in place. And you can clip another clip. When you get to the corner, you're going to fold it in the same way. Fold it down and over itself. On the back side, it creates a nice 45-degree mitered corner. And if I show you on the front, you also get a beautiful 45-degree mitered corner.